From Software has established themselves as one of the best developers of all time, and they have released some rather challenging video games. It is no secret that as we move into the 2020s, more companies are going to copy the Souls-Bourne formula that From Software made so popular. And with Shadow of the Erdtree, the long-awaited Elden Ring DLC right around the corner, I thought this would be a perfect time to rank every single From Software Souls game from worst to best. Let's go ahead and get into it. Coming in at dead last, I have Dark Souls 2. Now listen, Dark Souls 2 is not a bad video game by any means, but the absolute unfair design of this video game with like the hitboxes and the enemy placement just really sucks a lot of the fun out of Dark Souls 2 for me personally. Dark Souls 2 has a ton of redeemable qualities, however this is the one I really did not like the most just because it feels like an absolute chore to get through, okay? Just straight up, there's no denying that. And I do think that was on purpose. I think that From Software wanted to make Dark Souls 2 an extremely hard and unfair video game, and I think that they accomplished that with Dark Souls 2. They straight up just did it. Not to mention it does feel dated compared to the other Souls games, however it did come out a long time ago. I do understand that. There are redeemable qualities of Dark Souls 2 and it's not a bad video game overall, it's just the worst From Software game in my opinion. Coming in at this next spot, for the second worst Souls game, I have Demon Souls. Now I want to start off by saying that Demon Souls is the OG. Demon Souls built what we have now, and it honestly set the foundation. However, with that being said, it does lack content, and I do think that this is the weakest boss lineup out of all the titles. I also think that Demon Souls lacks replayability as well. For me personally, all of the From Software Souls games are super replayable except for Demon Souls, and I feel like it just lacks depth. That's overall what it lacks the most, is depth. It's not a bad video game once again, and the remake is pretty good. However, it feels very vanilla to what From Software has given us in recent time. Now I feel like those two takes right there are pretty popular, so now we're going to get into the interesting territory. I see a lot of people shift up their rankings around these, spots. Coming up next, I have Dark Souls 1, the original Dark Souls. Now look, this kind of pains me, man, because Dark Souls is low-key one of my favorites from Software. The original Dark Souls is so replayable for me. I don't know what it is about this game. I always find myself booting it up and doing a run and, speedrunning it, doing whatever. I always just love hopping on Dark Souls and just doing a quick playthrough. It's so much fun, and it's honestly super replayable for how small this game is, and I think that's the genius of this game. This game's level design is incredible and genius in my opinion. Dark Souls, for what it is, it's an absolute gem, okay? It's a straight up gem, and I love Dark Souls so much, and I want to put it higher because it is one of my personal favorites. But I feel like it has to come in this low just because it does lack compared to the other masterpiece games that we have coming up on this list. So yeah, Dark Souls comes in at the third worst spot in From Software's game catalog. I do think it's amazing, however, we just have some straight up masterpiece video games coming up, dude. Next up, I have Bloodborne. Now look, some of you guys might be up in arms right now because I know some people consider Bloodborne to be the best Souls game. However, let me explain why it's not, okay? Bloodborne's base game is honestly kind of lacking in bosses, and it's kind of short, and it kind of lacks content in the base game. Now, we did receive one of the best DLCs ever in video game history, in my opinion, in Bloodborne's Old Hunters DLC, okay? We have amazing bosses in that, and that adds a ton of content. But I think compared to the games coming up on this list, Bloodborne does lack in content, and not to mention too, man, this thing is kind of capped with it being at like 30 FPS nowadays. I really want a PC port or something of this game so I can play it on a high resolution with a nice crispy frame rate. I think it would be absolutely amazing. Word on the block is that Bloodborne is actually getting a remake, and that would be absolutely amazing. I do think that the original Bloodborne, though, is kind of lacking in content, and it's not really aging too well. That's not to say it's not an absolute masterpiece video game. Bloodborne is a 10 out of 10 in my opinion. I want to make that clear. I think all the games coming up on this ranking are 10 out of 10s. Bloodborne is fantastic. I think there are better From Software games, though, and I do think it's lacking. That's just my opinion, though. Comment down below if you guys disagree with me. Next up, I have Dark Souls 3. Dark Souls 3 is amazing, and it is an absolutely phenomenal conclusion to the Dark Souls series. I think one of the reasons I think that Dark Souls 3 is so good is because it kind of took everything that the previous two Dark Souls games had and it just polished it and made it perfect in my opinion. The mechanics feel really buttery and polished, and honestly the boss design here is next level. Dark Souls 3 also put a lot of people on to the Dark Souls community. I remember when Dark Souls 3 came out, a ton of new players started playing the Souls games because they heard how great this game was, and From Software really just took it to another another level and kind of put everyone on. I don't really have much else to say about Dark Souls 3. I mean, it's just a really, really good conclusion to an amazing trilogy. I think it comes in at the number 3 spot for the third best From Software game in their video game catalog. Now, coming in at the number 2 spot, I consider this game to be an absolutely flawless, perfect video game. I have Sekiro. Sekiro is just a masterpiece through and through. The story here is just genuinely one of the best stories From Software has ever produced. The main protagonist of this story, Wolf, is one of the best protagonists in video game history. I do not care. Wolf is seriously one of the best video game protagonists. And From Software, in my opinion, was at their most creative when they made Sekiro. I don't understand how they put this game together, honestly, because it is such a change of pace from their other games. Yet they still were able to add their From Software touch, and that's really what makes this game special in my opinion. I don't think any other studio could have made this game. Genuinely, this game is actually crazy, guys. While Sekiro is a linear story game and it doesn't have a massive open world, it holds so much replayability just for the combat alone. Once you actually beat Sekiro, you don't want to stop playing. Like, once you master the combat, which Sekiro forces you to master the combat if you want to beat it, you want to play the game over and over and over again, and it honestly, it's just so much fun. This game is just a blast and it has amazing stories, and it's so good through and through. But yeah, Sekiro comes in at the second best From Software game in their catalog. Coming in at the number 1 spot for the best From Software game of all time, this should be no surprise to anybody, it's Elden Ring, dude. First of all, let's start with the visuals here. The visuals are absolutely stunning. This open world is absolutely beautiful and it's designed so perfectly in my opinion. The boss design here is honestly just peak boss design in any video game. From Software was seriously at their most creative with a lot of these bosses, dude. These bosses there's just so many creative, insane bosses in Elden Ring. Obviously you have the main story bosses, but dude, there's just so many like little side bosses here and there that are just so creative and intricate, and honestly a lot of the bosses don't feel similar to one another. Another thing I absolutely love about Elden Ring is the replayability. I mean, the replayability in Elden Ring is nuts. There's so much content. There's so many unique, crazy weapons that you can use that are just so insanely cool. And you're able to just sink hundreds of hours into Elden Ring. You can truly play this game however you want, I feel like. And that's what makes it absolutely special in my opinion. And honestly, just seeing the From Software formula on a massive open world scale, it's just an absolute masterpiece of a video game. Like, that's just all it is, dude. It's straight up perfect and flawless in my opinion. Not to mention the fact that we're taking DLCs into account. We know that in a couple months, Shadow of the Erdtree is going to be dropping, and from what we know about Shadow of the Erdtree, we know it's going to be one of the best and biggest DLCs in video game history. It's going to be absolutely massive, and you slap that right on what Elden Ring already is. I think it just solidifies it as the best From Software game, hands down. Like, there's no debate, and low-key, Elden Ring is one of the best video games ever made. Okay, I said it. But yeah, there's my From Software games ranking. What do you guys think of this? I think I have a really, really solid ranking here. I know some people might be mad at Bloodborne, but honestly, I think it belongs there. But it's just my opinion. Comment down below what you guys think. I'm really excited to hear what you guys think of this ranking. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.